One of the most common social anxiety problems is not feeling able to start conversations. You want to say something, you think of something to say, but it just feels awkward and forced and unnatural to be the one who starts the conversation. So you wait for the other person to speak first, and when they don't, you interpret that as rejection. Like, they must not like me. They're thinking that I'm weird right now. Even though the real problem is just that anxiety stopped you from initiating. Here's one thing that most people don't know about anxiety recovery. You can't talk directly to the part of the brain that controls the threat response. The amygdala, it doesn't understand logic, it doesn't understand reassurance, it only understands behaviour and experience. That means when your brain starts to believe that starting a conversation is dangerous, you can't just tell it, people won't judge you, it's fine, just speak. Unfortunately, your brain just won't listen to that. What you have to do is show it through experience that starting a conversation is safe, and that's when exposures come in. Now, everyone talks about exposure therapy. They say just face your fears and anxiety disappears. If only it were that easy. Exposure therapy is essential for overcoming anxiety, but it only works if it's done right. For someone with social anxiety, the exposure isn't going to the event. For someone with driving anxiety, the exposure isn't driving on the motorway. The real exposure isn't to the external situation, it's to the internal experience. Going to the party, starting a conversation, introducing yourself, those aren't the exposures. They're just situations that allow you to experience the feelings that your brain is currently afraid of. Things like awkwardness, nervousness, blushing, sweating. The real exposure is feeling those sensations and staying. You're doing the exposure to feel all those ways and not to avoid them. So let's say that you're standing next to someone at work or school or the gym, and your brain says, don't say anything, I'll just be awkward, they probably don't want to speak. So you naturally stay silent, but then later your brain says, see, they didn't talk, they must not like you. But nothing bad actually happened. The anxiety just blocked the behaviour that would have created an interaction. Something else that's helpful to remember is that the real exposure isn't to have a perfect conversation. The exposure is just to start the conversation while feeling anxious. Feeling anxious is the goal. When your heart's racing and you feel awkward and you want to speak but kinda don't at the same time, you going up to someone and saying, how's your day been? That's the exposure. And every time you do it, you're teaching your brain that starting conversations isn't dangerous. So when you're doing exposures properly, the goal changes. The goal isn't to feel calm, the goal is to experience the uncomfortable sensations and feelings. Again, the goal of exposures is to feel anxious, and the only way you can really fail one is to avoid it completely. Because when you stay in the moment, even though it feels awkward, your brain learns that these feelings can't actually harm me. When you practice this over time, something cool happens. Your heart might start racing before starting a conversation, but it stops controlling your behaviours. And then you start having more conversations with family, friends, strangers. The anxiety doesn't feel as powerful. Your brain, specifically the amygdala, learns. It stops sounding the alarm so often because it's learned nothing bad actually happens. So this week, I want you to try one very small exposure. Nothing terrifying, just one thing that's slightly uncomfortable. Maybe it's just start one small conversation. Ask someone how their day's going, and when the anxious feelings come up, remind yourself that you're not doing this exposure to feel confident, you're doing it to experience these anxious feelings, not to control them. That's the exposure. And each time you do it, you're teaching your brain that starting conversations isn't dangerous.